wanna go, but I don't use. Hey, I've been cruising, loading, quickly reaching maximum capacity. Want it, gonna show my identity. Get up on your feet, teeth down the world. Get your glance all the whole world. Snooping round down will get you nowhere. You look tough in your mind. We all drop it, amaze of relationships. Life goes on with or without you. I swim in the sea of the unconscious. I search for your heart, cause in my truth self.
Hello everyone, long time no see, huh? Welcome to the 4th episode of the Why You Should Play Paperverse Games series. I wanted to get this episode out a lot sooner, but life and stuff. For the unaware, we shipped Direct 3 back in May, and since then it's been all business for me. Well, sort of anyways. You see, I thought going into the summer, I was gonna have all this time to make more episodes, plan cool stuff in the background, and most importantly, play more games. And so far, I pretty much haven't done any of this. It's been my very own Summer of Jeeve moment.
I'm gonna read a book, from beginning to end, in that order.
I've always wanted to do that.
I'm going to play frov.
You mean golf?
Frov! Frisbee golf, Jerry! Golf with a frisbee! This is gonna be my time. Time to taste the fruits and let the juices drip down my chin. I proclaim this the Summer of George!
Pretty much this, except that's how it started, and here's how it's going. So I told myself I was gonna get off my tail, be productive, do something with my life and time, and that something ended up being getting back on my tail and playing a video game. Though not just any video game. Today's focus is on a certified Paperverse banger, the apple of our time. So let's immediately address the elephant in the room. Apple of our time in the name, there's a time motif, right? It's a common video game law that if you have anything to do with heavy time use, then you've got to have a time motif, whether across the UI or in the overall theme of the game. Though mostly it's got to be in the title screen. Yeah, you already know the examples I'm going to cite. Chrono Trigger did it so well that it has not been topped since. There's just a majesty there. Nearly 30 years later, and that title screen still gets me. Oh, and while on the platform, let's not forget about another gem with an awesome clock and time motif in the title. This is a close second for me, honestly. Another 95 classic with a stellar atmosphere. I was totally not supposed to play this game when I was younger, but a little scamp is gonna be a scamp, I suppose. So how does the apple of our time fare then? Well, we've got our immediate clock ticking and design accents, of course, which I'm all for. And don't let the softer shaded art style deceive you. There's some insane attention to detail in just the menu alone. Like for instance, these dial hands here. The one you control is the hour hand, while this long pink one in the background is the minute hand, followed by the blue one being the seconds hand. You can even tell by the game's sound design too. Yeah, believe it or not, the UI clicking noise the game makes is an exaggerated sound for the click a real watch hour hand will make from its gears. You know, this is normally heard in quartz automatic watches, since the gears controlling the hour and minute hand need to engage every time the second hand moves. That's why they produce two distinct sounds. I would play the sounds, but they're super subtle, and my recording software couldn't pick them up well. But when you download the game, you can totally hear what I'm talking about. The tick-tock in the background is from the seconds hand, while the moving UI one would be from your minutes and hour one. It was honestly the first thing that caught my attention, because as someone who used to study watches and mechanical movements, it's a very subtle inclusion. It's a little early for a tangent, but I promise I'm going somewhere with this one. Alright, story time! So, I used to work at a luxury watch boutique as a client advisor, Audemars PA to be specifically. We sold very expensive timepieces, and because they were, well, expensive, you didn't end up selling too many. My clients were all upper middle class and a few trust fund silver spoon types. You think business would be good, but not too many rich folks fancied having a slab of metal and gears that took more time to read than your phone. So a lot of times I'd be bored out of my mind and inventing ways to stay busy for 10 hours, doing stuff like this instead of polishing watches. But when I ran out of serious business to attend to, I would just read the store educational material. And in this stuff, I learned what I learned. Though more importantly, I learned about the story our brand was trying to tell. Only weirdos like me care about the fact that the Pan Am Special Edition Navitimer uses an in-house Breitling B01 movement. No, most people only care about the story around the product and the experience you get from it, which is why the Apple of our time really captivated me. The story here is different. It's a little hard to put into words because it's not a grandiose story that's never been told before. In fact, you might be forgiven for thinking there's hardly any story at all. Not much is spelled right out for you in the early game, and you can go some long stretches of gameplay without getting any snippets of what's going on. Truth be told, it's a bit of a long journey, but I hope to convince you that it's a journey worth taking. Though, let's slow down a bit, start with the basics. The Apple of our time is a side-scrolling turn-based RPG, and with this being a Paper Mario-centric channel, I'll address that elephant in the room too. No, there's not much common ground between this game and Super Paper Mario. In fact, there's not a ton of common ground with any of the Paper Mario games. There's surface-level similarities, such as action commands in combat and some tongue-in-cheek writing, but never once when playing did I really feel the direct inspiration. This game feels and plays much slower than Paper Mario, and that is a strength of it. You see, the further in the game you get, each area becomes more and more puzzle-like, where you're gaining new abilities and using them to traverse the world. You move from screen to screen, and each screen is built like a self-contained puzzle for you to solve. It's very slow and methodical, unlike Paper Mario, or even this game's closest Paperverse contemporary, Angels and Demons. If you're a fan of the RPG genre, then an instinct you have is to move with a sense of urgency, usually. Of course, there's exceptions where you'll want to slow down and explore the world you've been thrust into, but in the back of your mind, you're aware of your goal to move forward. Here in this game, all you want to do is move forward, but you do it at the world's pace. Again, trying to explain this game was actually a little more difficult than I first thought it would be. A lot is left up to you to extrapolate and come to terms with. In this adventure, you play as Stephanie and Thomas, a close couple that wake up in a strange land with no recollection of how they got there. The only thing they know is that they need to keep moving forward. It's a familiar trope, but a good one that gives you direction and a goal in mind, finding a way out of this desert. Like I said earlier, the story is light for right now, and for some RPGs, that would be a bad thing so early. But here, it's done well, mainly due to how dynamic and awesome the protagonists are. Stephanie and Thomas really make for a great pair, and you can tell from their dialogue how much they care about each other. They feel like a real couple trying to remain positive and figure things out. There's history between them, and it's brought up at just the right beats to make the relationship feel natural. In a way, they are the story for right now. This is their tale, and they have events centered around them. But as you explore and meet others, you really get the feeling of them also just being a thread in this tangled web of events. The intro actually kind of tipped me off to this. My first run through, I assumed this was talking about Steph and Thomas. But after playing this again, I saw the line I missed, a universal truth that applies to everyone. I thought this was talking about like us as the players. There's plenty of epithets about time, though now I'm pretty sure this was foreshadowing how time works in this realm and what it can do to those who are stuck here. Well, speaking of here, I guess it's time to talk about the game's setting. So the characters find themselves in the space of exceptional time. This would be the world itself, and where you start is referred to as Kairos Desert, the land where time doesn't flow. So we've got some time manipulation stuff going on here, but from what I played, no travel, so no halls of time like in Chrono Trigger. Instead, time itself is tangible in a way. It flows through the world and affects all manner of things, like Stephanie's weapon, for example, the sand gun.
For his neutral special, he wields a gun.
The sand itself can slow down time, and Stephanie can use it in her weapon to freeze enemies or objects. Or my favorite use case, an object can be sent to the moment in time that is the most important to it and react based upon what that moment is. The best example of this is a seed that gets planted in the sand and then sprouts immediately. To the seed, the most important time is germination, or when it blooms. So the sand takes it to that moment in time. Man, it's a very Remedy-esque concept. You know Remedy, right? The studio best known for Alan Wake and Control. Their games have some mind-bending concepts like this one, things that really give you pause. And as you play, you'll discover more interesting ways in which the time flows. Like Thomas, being able to throw bouncing apples that never shatter, since after a little sprinkle of that eternal sand, they don't follow their natural timeline, so to say. Which is another one of those Remedy-like concepts where an object can be imbued in a way where it no longer adheres to the natural progression of its timeline. The way it's described in-game is that an apple in its regular progression of events would be absolutely splattered on a wall if you threw it. Though with the eternal sands of time, the apple instead gets merely shuffled off the natural progression of time. So instead of shattering on that first bounce, it just keeps bouncing forever since it's misplaced from its timeline. Now, as crazy as that might sound, there's actually a little science, or pseudoscience, to lend credence to it. How do I know? Well, in my freshman year of college, I wrote a paper in English about how Einstein's theory of space relativity actually played into the plot of Shakespeare's play, The Merchant of Venice. It actually didn't, and the weird mashup was just a poor excuse for me to repurpose an old essay, but hey, I gotta see. At any rate, when we're talking about that old Einstein theory, it's good to remember the basics. Sometimes people get two of his theories mixed up, special relativity and general relativity. The man was a genius, but creative names for his groundbreaking theories were not strong suits of his. The special relativity theory states that time speeds up or slows down depending on how fast an object moves through space. If a person traveled near the speed of light in a spaceship, that person would age more slowly than a person traveling at a regular speed on Earth would. Kind of like a certain apple, While not moving at the speed of light, you can see even by this early time travel theory how fast-moving objects are beholden to some of the quirks of time. I think the apples, the sand, Steph, Thomas, and everyone are actually all traveling in a space between time itself. I mean, the name, the space of exceptional time, kind of gives that away, but what it doesn't give away is how they're moving through this space. Unifying time and space creates, well, space-time, a fourth-dimensional fabric-like model that includes space's 3 dimensions, and the fourth dimension being time. So if anyone tells you that we're third-dimensional beings or whatever, you can set them straight and tell them we're actually fourth dimensional. And if they ask you, how do you know? Just tell them a talking fox on YouTube told you. Now, Einstein's theory of general relativity holds that space-time can be bent. The resulting curvature is known as gravity. Space-time actually makes a number of physics theories simpler, including time travel. The theory can be best illustrated by envisioning the fabric of space-time, like a beach towel, which is then dented when anything with mass sits on it, well, like this watermelon. When space-time is bent, the object traveling through it travels on that resulted curved path. Bending space-time far enough creates a shifted sense of time. It's my headcanon that Thomas and Steph's world actually fell through a black hole, and the planet is accelerating and decelerating as it moves through the space phenomena. This to me would explain why the further you venture in the world, the more time distorting and physics breaking stuff you encounter. I don't think you're actually making progress in the traditional sense. I think the world itself is still Earth, but it's being distorted by the immense pressure and force being exerted on it by the wormhole. You see, the original scenario for black hole time travel theory involved a spaceship traveling around the length of a spinning black hole at the speed of light. According to this theory, the spaceship would experience half the time of the people on Earth. 5 years to the astronauts would be 10 years to the people on Earth. Really wonky stuff. Wow, I am way off topic and I have no clever transition, so let's talk about the music now. The music is good, but pretty subdued. Exploration themes are soft and dreamlike, sort of like listening to the soundtrack of a children's nursery rhyme. In fact, the game's entire presentation so far gives me that vibe, which makes sense since from the intro and other sections of the game, you can sort of see that there's like an omnipresent force either telling or guiding the story. I usually would separate the music and the presentation, but for the apple of our time, they're just too connected. Well, kind of like Thomas and Steph. Here's actually a quick example of what I mean. Let's take a listen to a later section's exploration theme. Very slow and a little haunting. It's all a careful balance that's being maintained, sort of like the music's time signature. Now, I'm no betting fox, but it's in my totally authoritative opinion, the OST is in 4/4. That's a common time signature in music. It just means that there are 4 beats for every measure. I'll actually show you a real example. Now, I've been at a jazz band for quite some time, but I do remember the fundamentals, sort of. I had an old assignment where my group had to transcribe some pieces of our favorite music. See, I was playing Super Mario 3D World at the time, and I chose Double Cherry Pass to transcribe. Pay the most attention to the drum set and bass guitar sections. They're the easiest to follow with their 4 notes and 4 beats. You can also count along with the music too, and follow how it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 type beat. The rhythms you find in all sorts of music are super fascinating. And for those curious, I got an F on this assignment. The teacher did not like how we chose such an easy song to do. I was pretty mad, but I got my get back with the Mystic Quest battle theme. It's my magnum opus and I have never transcribed anything better. So, taking what we learned and applying it to the apple of our time, you can see how the time signature and slower beats per minute strike a cool balance of pumping you up, yet also kind of lulling you into a false sense of security, which is that awesome transition I was looking for earlier. Let's talk about the combat. Alright, I'm a bit ashamed to admit this, but I died a ton when playing this game. I think it's because I wasn't as thorough as usual when fighting and didn't take the time to always exploit enemy weaknesses or desires. It's not overtly difficult, but the enemies can whittle down your health, and when there's a group of like 3 different types, oh yeah, you better be on your A game. There's a good amount of complexity here, not too much where you drown in sub-menus and hidden context, but just enough where there's a good gap between the skill floor and ceiling. Thomas and Steph both have core abilities, throwing fruit and shooting a gun, though these get expanded a ton with time and love. Time is a battle currency that allows you to access unique abilities for a limited amount of, well, time, while love lets you perform some interesting actions. My favorite is the time-based one where you wind up your arm to power up your attack and range. The combat, like the exploration, is a little slower than other Paperverse contemporaries. It's deliberate. The extra time comes from lining up your base attacks or using Thomas's skills of deliberation to figure out how to get an enemy to stop fighting. They're like mini puzzles within combat. Sometimes enemies will tell you outright what they want, other times they'll be much more subtle about it. It's great fun if you're a pacifist, but old Chekhov had a point. You give me a gun, I've got to use it. So that just leaves me with the question of the day. Why should you play the apple of our time? Well, you should play it because of the intrigue. The game challenges you mentally and presents obstacles in a way that feel like you're simultaneously making progress, yet standing still in the rivers of time. Steve Wynn once asked, "What's the most fetching thing that provokes people? A volcano? Fountains that dance? A pirate ship that sinks? Some other animated device or presentation? Is that as strong as mystery?" Allure and intrigue are much more powerful. They taunt you. And that about sums up my feelings for this game. I spent just shy of 8 hours here trying to understand things and figure out the presented mystery. It's a great mental exercise, and it helps that the game is also really fun. The characters, music, and mechanics all come together to leave the impression of a grand story just waiting to be unraveled. I of course will link in the description where you can find the game and all of its relevant pages, so please go check it out. Well, that's everything from me. All I ask is that you please stay intrigued, my friends, and I'll see you all later. Goodbye.